it'll help if I turn my mic on. So, hi again, everybody. I'm Jason, and now you can probably hear me. Muted myself unintentionally. So let's try this again. I'm back from a short trip, and it's really good to be here with all you guys. And I'm still learning all the technical aspects of trying to do a live stream here on Substack, but appreciate all of you guys who are turned in. I am attempting to monitor the chat on a different screen, so my multitasking skills are casual at best. Anyway, I was just browsing on a different social media platform a few days ago, and this guy had a really nice things to say about the OM system OM1 Mark II camera. But he wrote in there basically, it is a wonderful technology, it's a great camera, but it is crippled by its small sensor. And that just sends my hackles up when people say that. Because, and I replied to the person, I could turn this around. I could say your full frame camera is really great, except its giant sensor is really hampering my style. So I thought I would dust this topic off again a little bit and talk about it here today. So, you know, let me just start off with a little disclaimer here, okay? Whatever camera you use, have fun using it, all right? But there is this real stigma attached to anything that's not a 35 millimeter sensor camera, and it's frankly getting a little bit ridiculous. So I'm going to talk about it today and try to address this. And if you haven't read my latest post that came out this morning, go read that as well. In fact, I might be able to even put it in the chat. Let me see if I can do that. I'll put a link in the chat to that, my latest post. Let's go over here and find it here. And if you're subscribed, I really appreciate it. Okay. I'm going to put that in the chat right now. And that is my latest post. So you can take a look at that whenever you want. I appreciate it. I appreciate all the little likes on this video. And I appreciate all your subscriptions. So back to this idea that you got to have a full frame camera in order to be a serious photographer. And it's just so ridiculous. But I'll tell you where it comes from. It comes from the industry itself. Because I started in digital photography actually late by most people. I knew a lot of people who were adopting digital cameras as early as 2002, 2003. I didn't start until 2005 with this. So I got in late, but part of that was because I wanted a camera that had the feature set that rivaled what I was shooting with my film camera. Okay, so that's fine. But when the digital SLRs first came out, none of them were full frame. None of them were 35 millimeter. And full frame is a stupid term, because why is 35 millimeter full frame? Why not 645? Why not medium format? Why not, isn't an 8x10 or a 5x7 view camera full frame? Everything is smaller than that. So that's kind of a silly term. But here was the thing. When we first got DSLRs, the manufacturers were a little bit slow and even, I might say, reluctant to develop a full line of lenses that were designed for that format. In other words, when I was using my Nikon D2X, it was an APS-C format camera, as were all of the Nikon cameras prior to the D3 coming out. Well, that meant cropping down from 35 millimeters. And what it really meant was that your lenses did not behave with the same angle of view as what you would have on a 35 millimeter film camera. And without the manufacturers producing a line of lenses that were designed for the smaller format sensor, everything was kind of a kludge. So you take your 35 millimeter lens, it's now a 50 millimeter lens. You take your 50 millimeter lens, it's now a 75 millimeter lens. And while the manufacturers did come out with some specialized APS-C format lens designs, most of them were slow variable aperture zooms. There was a couple of pro lenses, but where you really feel the pain with those systems was on the wide angle side of the house. Because I mean, if you're a telephoto shooter and you get 50% more reach or whatever because of the crop, hey, you're happy, and it was great. In fact, I kept a crop sensor Nikon camera around, a D300, D300S, I think, for the longest time, just for wildlife, okay, until we got more pixels. So by the time the full frame or 35 millimeter format camera started appearing on the market, this was like 2008, 2009, well, all of a sudden you could use all the original lenses. And I think the manufacturers, I don't want to say they got a little bit lazy, but they sort of divided their offerings into two camps. The APS-C cameras were really just low-cost alternatives if you didn't want to spend a lot of money. And the lenses they made for them were these all-purpose, slow aperture zoom lenses, by and large. And if you were a real pro and you wanted to use all the good glass, you had to get one of their 35 millimeter or full frame cameras, okay? And I think that's where it went. And these ads would come out, move to the full frame, see the full frame advantage, the full frame advantage. Well, what is the full frame advantage anyway? And I talk about all of the things that most photographers would list as being that advantage. But I'll tell you what it is. It's a lot of stuff that is valid on spec, on paper, but it's not necessarily valid in practice. Okay, are there differences? Absolutely. And I'm going to go through some of those. That I went through in the article, but I'm going to go through a little more detail here with some examples that I can post. But the whole idea that if you're not using a big camera, you're not a professional is just, I don't know. It's garbage. It's just not a great idea. But I'm going to anecdotally remind myself back in the mid, I don't know when it was, the Fujifilm X-T1 came out. It's an APS-C format camera, smaller retro design, nice camera. Really, Fujifilm makes some really great stuff. And one of the things that they do, of course, is that because they only have one format, that being APS-C, medium format notwithstanding, all of their lenses are designed to be equivalent. So you could get a 23 millimeter lens, which behaved like a 50. And you had these weird, or I should say exotic, focal lengths, especially on the wide end, for their format. And the same is true with the Micro Four Thirds line, Olympus, Panasonic. They came out with that format back in Micro Four Thirds, I think it was 2008 or 9. I can't remember exactly. Dedicated suite of lenses. So all of their lenses are going to work. If you want a wide angle lens, just go get one. Okay, there was no competition within the manufacturer for different camera formats. So again, I shot Nikon since I've shot Nikon since 1987, film and then digital. And it was only in 2023 that I decided to try out Four Thirds because I had the same concerns as I think all photographers do. And I want to show these by going into my I made some bullet points just so that I can share this with you guys today. So let's check this out. Hit over here. Okay, common concerns about Micro Four Thirds. This is pretty much what comes out in any conversation, and I had the same concerns. Okay, because I was shooting prior to OM system cameras a Nikon Z9, and I almost got the Nikon Z8. These are awesome cameras. Okay, fantastic cameras. So I don't want to marginalize that. This is not about those cameras. So the first concern, first of one concern, let's start here. They don't have enough resolution. Okay, well, this is true. The Micro Four Thirds cameras in particular have lower resolution sensors, megapixels, than do the full frame and even some of the APS-C cameras that are out there. So OM system, the OM1, the OM1 Mark II, the OM3, the OM5, they're all a 20.3 megapixel sensor, and in the OM1 and OM3, it's a stacked sensor. It's a backside illuminated. It's made by Sony. Sony, who makes the sensors for Nikon as well as their own cameras, okay? So it's not like you're getting some cheap sensor, okay? And while that's capped at 20 megapixels, Panasonic has the G9 II, which is their flagship, for stills at least, 25 megapixels. So I could make the case that 20 to 24 megapixels, honestly, for 95% of photo enthusiasts is plenty. But it's not the same as having a 45, 50, 60 megapixel camera. You can get a 40 megapixel sensor from Fujifilm on their X-T5 series. That's APS-C. So that's a lot of resolution if you really want that. But the reason why, what do you do about this? Okay? How do you deal with it? And there's three things you can do. You can just not worry about it because 20 megapixels produces a reasonable size image. I looked at what happens when I open a file from Lightroom and send it to Photoshop, because that's where you might, you can have rulers and, resizing and all kinds of stuff, right? The native file size from my OM1 camera and my OM3 camera is at 240 DPI, which is the standard Lightroom export resolution, and it's plenty for printing. 21.6 by 16.2 inches. So 16 by 20. Now, that's fine. Most of the time, that is absolutely fine. I could even print at a slightly lower resolution, enlarge that a little bit, no problem. Okay. There are people who routinely print larger than 16 by 20. And if that's you, I hear you. Okay. You might want a higher resolution camera, and you're not going to get that from, say, Micro Four Thirds. But there's other things that are out there. You can use upsampling. You can even do high resolution shooting mode in the camera with something called pixel shift, which is where it actually shifts the sensor around. It takes a bunch of photos and merges them into one. Now, I don't do that a lot, but let me just give you an example. I wrote it down, okay? I went into an image in Photoshop and I opened it in Topaz Photo, formerly Photo AI, and I just did the default 2x upscale. Now, I rarely go that high, but 2x, it'll go higher than that. And if you have gigapixel, you can do even more. But 2x, it reproduces an 80 megapixel image, 43.2 by 32.4 inches. Okay, so that means you can enlarge these. And for the most part, it does a very good job. Okay, so I find that tool to be quite useful. Now, the corollary of not a lot of resolution is, well, then you can't crop in as much. Fair point. Absolutely fair point. So let me just then ask this question. Why are you cropping your image? Okay, because there's valid reasons for it. Reasons. Well, sometimes you just make a minor crop to improve your composition. Happens all the time. And that's honestly not an issue with the 20 megapixel file. It's just not a problem. But then there's the other kind of cropping that you do, cropping for extra reach. That bird in this frame is a little bit small. I'm going to crop my photo. Well, you can do that. And of course, if you want to do that, you need more resolution. But if you're shooting with a smaller sensor camera, APS-C, Micro Four Thirds, the lenses are going to give you double the reach by default. So you make up for the lack of reach by having more effective focal length. And what I mean by that is because the sensor is smaller, a Micro Four Thirds lens is going to behave like a lens in terms of its angle of view, like a lens that has twice the focal length. So for example, I would shoot my Z9 all the time in DX crop mode to give me 1.5x more reach. So my 400 millimeter lens becomes like a 600 millimeter lens. Okay. And when I did that, of course, I am cropping. It produced a 19 megapixel file, which I was perfectly happy with. I take out my OM1. I'm not cropping it at all. The sensor is just smaller. It's got a 2x crop factor. That means my 400 millimeter lens is like having an 800 millimeter lens on full frame, and it produces a 20 megapixel file. So actually 1 megapixel more than how I was routinely shooting my Z9. Now, since I've had that camera, there are longer lenses, but keep in mind, those bigger, longer lenses start going up in price and up in weight because you need larger lenses to cover the image circle so that the image covers the entire sensor. Okay, so you have to design, it's physics, you have to design full frame lenses to project an image that will cover the entire frame. Now, the second thing that comes across, and these are in no particular order, is not enough dynamic range. Okay, what about dynamic range? Now, dynamic range is basically described as the range of tones, the brightness values that your camera can capture and still retain detail. So we go from pure black to pure blown out white and everything in between. And it is absolutely true that full frame cameras have more dynamic range than smaller sensors. It's absolutely true. Okay, it's physics, how it works. So I've taken some plots, and I had an example of this in my article from today. Let's just look at what happens to dynamic range. Dynamic range decreases as ISO goes up. So as you're increasing your ISO, your sensitivity, you are losing dynamic range. Now here is the plot for the OM1 camera, and what you can see at its base ISO of about 200, this camera has about 9.5 or so stops of dynamic range, and it really goes down. If you push this camera into the crazy ISO settings, you get 1 stop of dynamic range if you're shooting at ISO 102,000, which, full disclosure, I do not do. Okay, but I will sometimes shoot 6,400, 12,000. Those are common ISOs if you shoot wildlife, if you shoot in any kind of dim or lower light conditions with a slower lens. Okay, and you'll also notice those 2 white circles, the 2 white dots over here, and those are let's see here. Oh, apparently my capture froze. All right, here's the plot. We're having some fun technical stuff. So here's ISO versus dynamic range. I apologize for that. I don't know what happened there. And you can see at ISO 200, the camera has its maximum dynamic range, and it goes down. And all these triangles here, these are the extended settings. So these black filled circles are the usable range, okay? And when you can, I can lower the ISO below 200, but those are non-native values. So these values here on the left, these open circles, these are the ones that are, I'm not gaining any dynamic range here. So if I then overlay a full frame camera with a good, high resolution sensor, the Nikon Z7 II, we'll throw that up here, you can see that by and large, the Z7 II has, at any given ISO, about a stop more dynamic range than the Micro Four Thirds camera. But where it really shines is up here. So it's below 200. The Z7 II has a native low ISO, native base ISO of like 64, I think, something like that. So at 64, you're getting 11.5 stops of dynamic range, but at 200, you're only getting 1 more stop of dynamic range. See that? And it also plateaus when you use the extended low ISO values. And this is nothing new. This is just physics. Now let's look what happens if you take that same Z7 II and shoot it, and it's the same sensor or very similar sensor to what's in the Z9, the Z8. Okay, they're all very similar. What happens if I shoot that In crop mode, DX crop, oh my goodness, look at this. The two plots are practically identical. And yeah, you can see the black lines are a little bit high. Forget that. That's just you know, within the tolerance of error. Okay, so once you start cropping your full frame camera, your dynamic range advantage pretty much goes away unless you're shooting here at the lowest ISOs. Okay, so that's the thing. Now, the last thing, of course, is that the shots are too noisy at high ISO. And it is true. I'm going to say it again. It is true that as you increase ISO, you increase noise. But this is in a vacuum. I'm going to go into Lightroom and let's look at two photos. And I don't know if you can see these on your screen very well. I'll try to make them as big as I can. But these are both 100%. On the left is my OM1, and on the right was, I believe, my Z9. And what you can see is if we zoom in here, and if I go into, like, say, 200% or something, okay, it is very obvious here that there is noise in both, but the OM1 image has more of it. It's got more grain. It's just, that's reality. But here's the thing. I didn't do any noise reduction on this. This was just with default settings that don't include any luminance noise reduction. All right. So if I go to the same photo and run Adobe's denoise, look what happens. All of a sudden, most of that noise problem is gone. And in fact, you know, I mean, I'm not saying I couldn't denoise the Z9 shot, but this idea that I'm going to be hit with crippling noise just doesn't apply in the real world where you shoot raw, you know how to do noise reduction. And in fact, there are really good tools for this. So if you use modern tools for your workflow, you will pretty much mitigate most of the noise concerns. I'm not saying it isn't real, but what I'm saying is in the real world, you can use tools that mitigate them to the point where you might not have that concern. I'm always baffled by photographers who say they will never shoot more than ISO 1600 with a camera because otherwise you get noise. And I'm like, have you never heard of noise reduction? Okay. And there's AI-based noise reduction. There's AI-based sharpening. There's AI-based upscaling. All of these things are very, very good, and they mitigate almost everything I just described. It is not the same as shooting an 80 megapixel or a 60 megapixel full frame camera. I get that. But the differences that most photographers would cite, the noise, the dynamic range, those can be mitigated by and large through modern post-processing software. So let's think about that. The only thing now that we're left with is the resolution, and that's reality. And that is just something you can decide whether or not you want to have or not have. So let's ask another question. When does the full frame sensor deliver an advantage? Okay. So you can get more resolution and better dynamic range whenever you're shooting a full frame camera below ISO 200, that top part of that curve I showed you, and if you're not cropping your images significantly. In other words, if you've got enough native focal length to frame your subject the way you want, and that there's plenty of situations where it happens, studios, landscapes, all kinds of stuff, right? You can get more pixels and more dynamic range. Okay, so that's true. Full frame camera there's another artifact of this smaller sensor, and that is something called effective depth of field. And I'm thinking about writing an article on that at some point, but I haven't gotten there. Effective depth of field just means how does it look? The depth of field is the appearance of stuff being in focus, either in front of or slightly behind the actual focal plane, which is just a plane. And as sensor size increases, depth of field decreases with any given aperture. Put another way, a small format camera has greater effective depth of field, equivalent to its crop factor for any given f-stop. So an APS-C sensor camera, like Nikon DX, Sony has them, Fujifilm, you're going to get 1.5 stops more depth of field compared to full frame. And with Micro Four Thirds, you get twice the depth of field, 2x, because it's a 2x crop. So an f4 aperture gathers light like f4, but it behaves in terms of the image appearance like you shot at f8. Now, that can be good or bad depending on which side of the coin you want to look at it. So let's talk about the potential of the small frame advantage rather than the full frame advantage. Okay? What are the benefits of the small sensor? Well, like I said, at least in the case of Micro Four Thirds, you have 2x crop. That means you get more reach. Your 200 millimeter lens is now like a 400 millimeter lens. You get also with that twice the depth of field. I'll get back to that in a little bit. But because you're getting that extra crop factor, you can often use smaller and therefore lighter lenses. This photo is of my collection of Olympus and Panasonic prime lenses, and there's a pencil there for scale. These are very, very small, and they're also very fast. These are f2, f1.8, f1.7 lenses, and you can put all of them, in a coat pocket if you really wanted to. So you got smaller lenses in general. They tend to be lighter. You have a smaller sensor, meaning less mass to move during image stabilization in the camera body. So these camera bodies have in-body image stabilization, or IBIS. They have to move the sensor around a little bit to compensate for camera shake. The smaller the sensor, the easier it is to compensate. So I can get, in a lot of cases, up to 7 stops, sometimes even a little bit more, of stabilization. And that leads to some crazy slow handheld shooting. Easily can shoot wide at a quarter of a second or even longer if you brace yourself against something, second or 2-second exposures. Handheld, which can be challenging with a larger camera, not just because of its larger sensor, but because everything is bigger. It's harder to hold it steady. You also get, because the file is only 20 to 25 megapixels, you're going to get smaller file sizes. That means they copy to your computer more quickly and they process more quickly. Those AI noise reduction tools and whatnot, they actually happen to work a little bit faster when you've got a smaller file. This is just normal. How many times have you said, God, I'd get a higher resolution camera, but man, I need a new computer to get it, right? To process my files. So these are potential benefits. And so where does the small sensor really shine? It shines with this kind of photography. And you can do anything. Don't get me wrong. You can do portraits, you can do studio, whatever. It's all good, right? But wildlife and action photographers are really going to appreciate a small sensor. Macro photography is outstanding when using a smaller sensor. Indoor available light photography can be really good, and travel photography. And like I said, you can still do studio photography and all of those other things, but if you really wanted, very shallow depth of field, that's where your larger sensor might be better. If you really want to produce, 14-bit 40, 50 megapixel files, yeah, go for it. It's, I'm not going to argue that at all. Okay. So let's just give you some examples. Wildlife. So here you got 2x the effective focal length. Your 300 millimeter lens, which you can hold easily in your hand and hand hold it, becomes a 600 millimeter effective. You get twice the depth of field. So I'm shooting at f4, f4.5, whatever. It's like shooting at f8. No more worrying about, oh, I got to stop down a little bit to make sure the eye is in focus. Oh, but now I'm paying a penalty in ISO. So if you wanted to shoot side by side, same depth of field, if I'm at f4 and you're at f8, you're going to have to use a higher ISO at f8 to get the same depth of field that I get at f4 at a lower ISO. You see how these differences suddenly become less significant in practice. Again, the smaller file size is important when you're shooting action, sports, wildlife, because you might have come back with 1,500 or 2,000 photos, and going through them is a lot easier, a lot faster when you don't have to transfer as much data. And this last bullet point is becoming less true, but the smaller raw file size means that some of these cameras are able to do something called pre-release or pre-burst capture in RAW. So when I'm shooting my Nikon Z9, okay, it has this pre-burst feature. What is that? What it means is that you can half press the shutter, the camera starts buffering frames, and then you press the shutter all the way, you shoot your burst, and it will capture some of those pre-release shots. Those shots from before you fully press the shutter button down. So you're watching that animal or you're shooting the sport, you want to get it, make sure the baseball bat is hitting the ball or the wide receiver is catching the pass, whatever. That pre-release capture is useful. And on my Z9, it was only in JPEG. There are other cameras now, I think Sony might have it, maybe Canon. They're starting to add the raw pre-burst capture. But it was certainly a feature that my Nikon didn't have when I got my Olympus camera, my OM1. Macro, another perfect example where now we're going to leverage this extra effective depth of field. Twice the depth of field. I set the camera to f8, that's the exposure, but it looks like I shot at f16. And if you've ever done any kind of close-up photography, you know just how important it is to get all that possible depth of field. The closer you focus to something, the shallower that depth of field becomes. So if you can shoot at f11 instead of f22, what's the benefit there? The benefit is that your exposure is faster. You can use a faster shutter speed without having to boost the ISO as high. And for moving, macro insects and whatnot, that can be a real benefit. Still life's different story, it doesn't really matter. But a lot of times if you're shooting macro, maybe even without a tripod, having that faster exposure, but still getting extra depth of field is a real benefit. The other thing that happens is that this 2x crop also gives you an apparent 2x increase in magnification. So if I framed up the shot, if I set my macro lens to 1:1 and framed it up in my OM camera, it would have the same framing in terms of the crop as if I had been shooting at a 2:1 magnification on the full frame camera. So you don't have to get quite as close to get the same tight framing with your macro lens, which can be beneficial. Okay, what else? Okay, let's keep going. Indoor photography. Shoot wide open to get all the available light while you still get depth of field. So here's a shot. This is inside Prague, the Cathedral of Prague Castle in Czech Republic. 1/10 of a second, f5, base ISO 200. So I'm getting my full 9 and change stops of dynamic range indoors, low ISO shooting. That IBIS system allows me to get pretty good handheld shots at slow shutter speed, sometimes all the way down to 1/4 of a second. Okay, and the aperture f5, which isn't crazy fast, gives me depth of field like I shot at f10. And I can tell you right now that if you were indoors with whatever camera, you probably wouldn't be stopping down to f10 or f11. It would just make your exposure, your ISO would go way off the chart. So this is really nice for indoor settings. And then finally, of course, travel photography. All of the things that I just said apply when you're traveling, but a smaller kit is fantastic because it's less weight, it's easier to pack, and it draws less attention to you when you're traveling. And then going back to that stabilization system, if you're indoors while traveling, no tripods allowed. Very, very nice. So this picture is my OM3 camera with two lenses. On the left is a 9-18 zoom, and on the right is a 14-150 zoom. Those give me the equivalent range of having an 18 to 300 millimeter kit, and I could fit this in a very small shoulder bag and call it good. All right, so I'll show something in a minute, what I took to California, but this whole idea of drawing less attention to you when traveling, I want to go back to when I used my Fuji X-T1. I took it on a workshop that I was leading with another photographer, and we were in Las Vegas, and I said, you know what, I want the small camera. I'm going to go with the small camera because we're shooting a lot of, it meant smaller tripod, and, back then there wasn't the crazy image stabilization systems like we have now, but still. I'm there shooting on a tripod. My co-instructor is there on a tripod. My clients are around us, and some guy comes up to me, of all people, and starts trying to give me photography advice. Does he go up to the people shooting the big DSLRs? No, because he assumed that they knew what they were doing because they had big cameras. So that means when you're shooting with a smaller camera in some, travel scenario, people aren't going to think that you're necessarily, a pro, and that isn't the worst thing, okay? So let's draw some conclusions here. First of all, I'm going to go back to what I said at the very beginning. There is no such thing as the best kit, okay? There's only the best kit for your needs or wants. Those are all valid. If you want, I like looking at pictures from 50 megapixel cameras zooming into 100%. Okay? No, I'll freely admit that. But I don't need to. I just like to. Okay? And that's a valid reason. But the concerns that people have about image quality are quite honestly a non-issue with any camera from today. And that goes for the Micro Four Thirds sensors, the APS-C sensors. They're all darn good. And to add to that, the modern software tools pretty much make those negatives, those too much noise and dynamic range and upscaling, the small reduced resolution, it makes them pretty much a non-issue. If you do travel for your photography, if you do wildlife photography or action and many other subjects, something like a Micro Four Thirds system is going to give you fantastic image quality in a very compact size. And I could extend that to say the APS-C cameras as well, okay, the Fuji cameras. I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm just telling you the stuff that I've purchased and used over the years. Now, the other cool thing was that my OM1 body, which I have here, it has practically, this is my OM1 right here. This thing has pretty much all of the same professional features as the Z8 does, and it's half the price. You can even get them used for less than that. It has subject tracking autofocus. It has, all of the cool features. It has other features that the Nikon doesn't have. It has the pre-burst capture. It shoots, I don't know, I can shoot in some cases up to 50 frames a second with this thing in RAW. It's a great camera. It has all the technology in it. So that comment that precipitated this entire talk today about, it's a great camera that is hampered only by its small sensor. That's what I'm saying. It's a great camera, and it's the features in the camera that really should be driving your purchase decision as to what to use, and as well as, how much do you want to carry around, okay? You can also get a lot of these Micro Four Thirds lenses from both Panasonic and OM Systems / Olympus on the used market for significant savings, so that's not a bad thing either. And just, again, that 7-stop IBIS Other manufacturers are getting there too with their larger sensors. I'm not going to say it's exclusive to the small format, but computational photography, things that are unique to the OM system cameras, virtual ND filter, virtual grad filter, things like that, can be quite compelling for a lot of photography and can have some serious advantage over larger systems that don't have those features. So, you know, let me just loop back here, and say that the if you want to go small, which is what I chose to do on my, because I took a family vacation almost for a long weekend. I took my OM3 and I put on this little 14 to 42 millimeter pancake lens. And I can put this in a coat pocket, basically. Okay, I can really, it's that small, and it's the equivalent of a 28 to 85, just about, or 84 technically. Is it the best lens? No, it's not the best, fastest lens. It didn't matter for the kind of shooting that I was doing, though, and it was fantastic because in an earlier time when I had my Z9, it didn't go in the bag. I took the Z9 and a couple of lenses to Croatia once. That's a 3-pound camera. And that's before you put a lens on it. This thing is, just about a pound. I can put it in a pocket and I can have all my pro features. I can shoot in RAW. Whereas if I hadn't had this, and had only a larger camera, I'm probably just going with my phone. And while I'm not knocking my phone, it's a different experience, right? It's no viewfinder, that sort of thing. So to me, it comes back to the one that you take with you. And if you're finding yourself, I see the comment, for the best camera is the one that's in your hand. Absolutely right, and which a lot of times ends up being people's phones. But if you could say, I can go out and shoot professional quality stuff with different lenses, big, small, or in between, get the features that I want in a camera that I can carry with me, very lightweight, either just with a strap or in a pocket, you might start carrying it more. If you find yourself leaving gear at home and not going out and taking pictures, then it can be disappointing at times, right? So really, realistically speaking, what we're trying to do here is make photography fun for everybody. And to me, when mirrorless cameras first came out, the concept was smaller, faster, lighter. And yet most of the manufacturers have gone in the opposite directions. Yeah, they're faster and the glass is better, but the camera suddenly got bigger and the lenses got bigger. And so that can hurt your back after a while. And to know that I can go on a trip and pack a lens that'll maybe even allow me to do some bird photography, that doesn't have to take up a giant 30-liter backpack, it's quite nice. So that's me. I changed over to this because I found myself mostly shooting wildlife, travel kinds of stuff. I still do landscape photography. And yeah, it would be great to have 50 plus megapixels. I have some clients and friends who have the Fuji GFX series, 100 megapixel camera. They're awesome. They're tremendous. But you got to slap a big lens on that. You're not going to wander around the streets of Prague with a medium format camera on a vacation, and you're going to really draw attention to yourself. So anyway, that's kind of what I am thinking. I want to thank everybody in the chat who's joined. I really appreciate. I'm glad that you have tuned in today. Please hit the like button, hit that heart for me before you go, just to get this up in the algorithm or whatever it might be. But my whole reason for my business is to get people enthusiastic about photography and photos, whether it's traveling or taking pictures of birds or just taking pictures of your grandkids running around. I want it to be fun, and I want you to feel like there's a lot of stuff you can do. The technology is also really, really good now. So, any camera can be your friend, but it doesn't have to be the full frame. It really doesn't. And so, if anyone gives you any grief for not using a full frame camera, um, you can just smugly know that you're getting excellent quality that they just don't understand. So, anyway, that's all I got for today. And thanks again for tuning in. And I will see you guys out there again soon. Thanks for reading, and have a great rest of your day, everyone. Take care.